Pavlo Smytsnyuk, actually at the Princeton University, as an associate research scholar jointly at the Sega Center for Hellenic Studies and the Department of Religion. He was from 2019 to 2022 the director of the Institute of Ecumenical Studies and a senior lecturer at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. After having studied philosophy and theology at the Gregorian in Rome, in Athens and in St. Petersburg, and he obtained a doctorate from the University of Oxford at Campion Hall. He will speak now on the demand for a new approach to dialogue. It is your turn. We are listening to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? So in my paper, I would like to point out how modern Orthodox theology's accent on liturgical, experiential, and political nature of religion can be read as a contribution to the current methodological debates on ecumenism. I will take as my departure point some critiques of modern Western category of religion as something focused on text or intellectual propositions. And then I will look at Zizoulas, Schmemann, and Yanaras to argue that ecumenism can move beyond dialogue on intellectual propositions to a more experiential dialogue on the modes of life. I will also point out what are the implications for the Eastern Catholic churches in this endeavor. So I would like to start with a general introductory remark on what is religion in modernity. What does modernity make to religion? It has been touched upon yesterday, yes, by Father McPatland, Father Avakumov, when they spoke on confessionalization. Today I would like to look from a slightly different angle. Religion in modernity somehow changes. And changes not only from perspective of the state or society, but also from its own understanding. Let me offer you three citations. One is by French anthropologist Louis Dumont, famous for his Homo hierarchicus. I quote, "Medieval religion was a great cloak. I am thinking of the mantle of Our Lady of Mercy. Once it became an individual affair, it lost its all-embracing capacity and became one among other apparently equal considerations, of which the political was the firstborn." End quote. British Catholic theologian Gavin Costa has argued that, I quote, "modern nation-state replaced religion as the center of society." That's the same idea as in Dumont. Further, the nation-state slowly took all the features of public religions, and its struggle for the total power and the construction of the public square was revealed to the preservation of its own privileges. The nation-state has caused, and this is important, the nation-state has caused the construal of religion to focus on doctrines, worship, and cultic practices, which are deemed by modernity to be the domain of religion, end quote. So both Dumont and Costa tell us the story of modernity's effect upon religion. Religion as something private, spiritual, concerned with dogma and liturgy, rather than with politics and power, is a recent invention, unknown outside modernity. There was no religion before modernity. Richard King, who is a specialist on Hinduism, analyzes the encounter between the West and India, and he claims that the Anglo-Protestant conception of religion has been imposed on Indian traditions, both by the colonizers and the Indians themselves. King enumerates 6 assumptions of such a category of religion that were transposed onto the Indian context, and I will only cite some of them. First is religion as a category, as a realm which is different from the scientific, political, and economic domains. The second is the emphasis on belief, or assent to a set of creedal propositions. The third one is scripturalism, the preeminence of scriptures defined by a canon over other dimensions, particularly rituals or oral stories. Discreteness, assumption according to which syncretism is inappropriate. The primacy of pure origins, the idea that the instant of a religion's inception represents a moment of purity par excellence, to which believers should aspire to return by means of reformation and purification, and some other points. Now, King adds to Dumont's and Costa's argument another feature. Religion as something focused on scriptures and creedal propositions is not only modern, but also Western, and more specifically Protestant concept. These statements, these ideas raise the question about the place of doctrines and dogmatic propositions in interfaith relations and in interpreting the past. This has had some effects on comparative theology, yes, as understood as interreligious dialogue, as practiced by, for example, Frank Looney, a Jesuit at Harvard. The criticism was that his method and comparative theology, thus understood, is focused on theological propositions expressed in written text, to the detriment of other expressions of religious tradition. John Maraldo observes that the standard understanding in much interreligious dialogue takes religion to be primarily a matter of teaching and belief in teaching. Although belief is not necessarily restricted to a set of propositions that can be true or false, it does, in the prevailing assumption, primarily concern linguistic expression. The standard understanding presumes the central role of teaching in different religions. And this is what actually we compare, two teachings, two texts. Marianne Moyert links the focus of religious and comparative studies on belief text to a Protestant, as opposed to a Catholic or Orthodox approach, with the implication that the individual has a primacy over community, things transcendental over those sensorial. She, as some other scholars, encourages the turn to ritual as a correction to the so-called textualism of most religious studies. The critiques by Marardo, Moyert, and others resonate to a large degree with the focus on liturgical aspects of Christian faith made by some modern theologians. And I would like briefly to look on Zizoulas and Schmemann. For Zizoulas, Christian truth is not so much a matter of intellectual concepts as it is a matter of life and praxis. The church is a mode of existence, a way of being, Zizoulas argues. For Zizoulas, who is one of the most prominent representatives of the so-called Eucharistic ecclesiology, a privileged perspective on the church comes through worship. Orthodox theology, I quote, is basically a doxology, a liturgy. It is a Eucharistic theology. Worship, in particular the Eucharist, is a topos par excellence in which the truth is being revealed. As Zizoulas argues, knowledge and communion are identical. The Christian dogma has to do more with life of community than with attempts to understand God intellectually. Zizoulas says that the creedal definitions carry no relationship with the truth in themselves, but only in their being doxological acclamations of the worshiping community. It is not possible for a concept or a formula to incorporate the truth within itself unless the Spirit gives life to it in communion. In other words, theological formulations are unintelligible outside the wider liturgical context for which they were essentially written. The scope of formulating dogma at the early church councils is not a desire to positively define the things divine, but to solve issues of church communion. The tension between centrality of worship and emphasis on religion understood as the totality of human life is visible also in the work of Schmemann. On the one hand, Schmemann insists on the identity of lex credendi and lex orandi and criticizes those who neglect the importance of worship as an essential part of tradition. The depth of the link between the Byzantine liturgy and Orthodox faith is made evident by Schmemann's negative reaction toward the possibility of using the Latin rite by the group of Roman Catholics or Protestants who convert to Orthodoxy. In a 1958 article, where he also acknowledges the validity of other Christian liturgical traditions, Schmemann claims, I quote, "Orthodoxy is, above all, faith that one must live, in which one grows, a communion, a way of life into which one is more and more deeply integrated. And now, whether we want it or not, this living faith, this organic spirit and vision of orthodoxy is being preserved and conveyed to us mainly, if not uniquely, by the Orthodox worship. Orthodox liturgical tradition is a unique synthesis of the doctrinal, ethical, and canonical teaching of orthodoxy, and I do not need to see how real integration into the Orthodox Church, a genuine communion of faith and life, may be achieved without an integration in the Orthodox worship." End quote. If my understanding of Schmemann's argument is correct, the participation in the ritual is a criterion of belonging to orthodoxy, even to a bigger extent than adhering to dogma, since an act of conversion or whatever passage from Catholicism to orthodoxy would presuppose a confession of the Orthodox faith. On the other hand, however, Schmemann considers the reduction, as it were, of the church life to worship as one of the major disasters of modern orthodoxy. The cult, instead of expressing church being in community of love, constitutes today the very essence of the church. The cult and the church have merged. The latter has become a cultic society. So Schmemann laments and says that Christians should repent for having spent too much time praying and worshipping rather than being engaged with the social, political, and economic issues of real life. One of the theologians who have been most pronounced on holistic and political dimension of Christianity is Jan Arras. For Jan Arras, Christianity is not a religion. It is the very reversal of religious terms. From its very inception, Christianity understands itself as ecclesia, with direct and conscious reference to ecclesia to demo, the popular assembly of the Greek polis. I quote, "It is no accident that the first apostolic Christian communities, in order to express and reveal their identity and their specific difference from any other religion, borrowed from ancient Greek political event the term ecclesia." This historical transformation of the ancient Greek political event into the Eucharistic body of the Christian church has two basic consequences. The first consequence is the Greek political model was the historical flesh that realized and revealed the radical difference between church and religion. The second consequence is the preservation and revealing of this difference between metaphysics and ideology, end quote. So the fact that early Christians have chosen a political term and not cultic term to describe themselves, ecclesia, was a claim that they constitute a political, not a religious community. Now, one can wonder whether Jan Arras' dichotomy between the political and the religious is not overly anachronistic, given that in classical antiquity, such a sharp distinction didn't exist. However, the core argument of Jan Arras that early Christians prioritized community life over sacrificial cult or what they perceived as religion is not wrong. So what is religion for Jan Arras? It is a response to an individualistic need of human beings to understand reality. which is realized through a focus on dogmatic statements. Basically, what Jan Ras proposes is that the mode of living of polis or ecclesia is to find the truth through experience, not through propositions. And this is one of the reasons of Jan Ras's criticism of the West. He said that the Westerners were afraid of freedom of relation. They needed individual certainties with objective assurances for their psychological security. Very interestingly, Jan Ras, this junction between orthodoxy and formulation is clearly visible from how Jan Ras treats Dothitios Ionaras, Vicentios Damodos, Eugenios Vulgaris. He says that they remained faithful to the letter of the Orthodox dogma and indeed attempted to defend orthodoxy from the West. However, they have been, I quote, trapped in Western theological assumptions. In other words, you can follow and defend Orthodox dogma, yet hardly be an Orthodox theologian. You can well be anti-Western, yet perpetuate a Western captivity, to use Florovsky's expression, of Orthodox theology. This approach, when pushed to its logical conclusions, would imply that fidelity to dogmatic propositions is not a sufficient nor main criterion of orthodoxy. In this, Jan Ras's position is close to that of Schmemann. Now, I would like to suggest that certain considerations made earlier can contribute to reconsider the textual propositional focus of ecumenical relations. Insistence on the holistic and political core of the Church and rejection of religious criteria of identity has a vast potential for aberration of a more nuanced Orthodox approach to other churches. If ecumenical dialogue is sometimes perceived as sterile due to impossibility to solve the divergence of dogmatic formulations or lack of agreement on the understanding of propositions, perhaps looking for a common experiential knowledge, a way of life, the tropos zois of Jan Ras or Zizoulas, can be a way out of impasse. If Schmemann and Zizoulas are correct that the liturgy is par excellence approach to Christianity, and if scripture and dogma exist in view of praxis, including liturgical praxis, then the latter has a priority vis-à-vis textual material, which ecumenism should not ignore. The ritual turn can be meaningfully applied to ecumenical encounter. The fact that Orthodox and Eastern Catholics share the same liturgical tradition is of fundamental importance here. However, the ritual turn can be object of similar criticism as the text-focused comparative work. As Schmemann's critique of Orthodoxy's degradation into cultic society suggests, to look at a tradition exclusively through the lens of ritual constitutes a reduction. If, however, we follow the insights of those thinkers and look at theology to be not only a discourse on God, church, and liturgy, but a reflection of the totality of human and social life, then we could conceive of comparative theology, but also of ecumenical dialogue as comparative not only of texts and rituals, but of modes of life. I suspect that, at least in Ukraine, it might be difficult, if not altogether impossible, to distinguish between the ways, the mode of life in which Eastern Catholics and the Orthodox live. A holistic approach to inter-church relations would allow us to reconsider the importance assigned to the dogmatic and theological rationale of these relations, in particular by shedding light on the political aspects at play. The etymology of term ecumenism fully legitimizes such an approach. Ikumene, which we translate as the common home, also means empire. Is ecumenism then a political endeavor? I would not go so far as to make such a statement, but one could not notice certain political elements of ecumenical relations. Let me provide just some examples related to the Eastern European churches, and I will end there. How many?
You have 8 or 10 minutes.
8 or 10 minutes, thank you. Yuri Avakumov, for example, emphasizes the Russian Orthodox Church's interest in ecumenical movement as conditioned by Soviet international politics. And he claims that it weakened greatly when the Soviet pressure upon the Church has vanished in the 1990s. Russian Orthodox Church rhetoric toward Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church is also politically conditioned. We have seen a sharp critique in the Soviet times, in the 1990s, and after the Russian annexation of Crimea. But also we had a dialogical intermezzo, if I can call it, from 2011 to 2013, when leaders of both churches have spoken more positively about the other church, and some meetings have taken place, in particular between His Beatitude Sviatoslav and Metropolitan Hilarion. I would suggest that these ups and downs have clear political reasons, and we can return to this in the discussion. Finally, the Russian Orthodox Church's strategic alliance with the right-wing Protestant and Catholics in the North America and Europe, which Antonio Spadaro has called the ecumenism of hatred, has a clear political, even partisan dimension. But I think Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church's ecumenism has also been shadowed by political motivations. Ihor Ranza and Alphonse Brüning research has suggested that the concept of Kievan Christianity, promoted by the Greek Catholics as a way to think their cooperation between their church and the two Ukrainian Orthodox jurisdictions, is not without political connotations. I would also suggest that some of Ukrainian Greek Catholic ecumenical initiatives should be read in the context of this church's minority status in the country. As yesterday Father Morozovich has pointed out, if you are a minority, you understand your ecumenical relations in a completely different way. The calendar reform, through which Ukrainian Greek Catholics abandoned the Julian calendar, and which was done previous consultation with the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, cannot be fully understood outside the political context brought about by the Russo-Ukrainian War. The focus on traditional values, which has been the core of the social work of Ukrainian Greek Catholics, but also of all Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations, is also not without political connotations. The focus of this council of the issue of family, sexuality, and reproduction is made to the detriment of issues of injustice, inequality, poverty, migration, or ecology. In other words, we see that issues that are part of the right-wing agenda take preeminence over the issues dear to the left. Yesterday, Thomas Kramer said something interesting about Armenians. I don't remember the exact expression, but it was something like that nation is a unifying ecumenical concept for the Armenians. I think the inter-church dialogue in Ukraine often claims to be aimed at Ukrainian nation and state building, which is not exactly a theological objective. Now, I do not claim that Russian or Ukrainian ecumenism is a political as opposed to theological exercise. It might be more helpfully understood as a theopolitical, as a belonging to this holistic sphere where the issues of dogma, identity, and politics mix and co-penetrate. As consequently, any attempt to understand ecumenism, disregarding issues of identity and politics, thus studied by other disciplines, as sociology, political theory, or conflict studies, will fail to see the problem in its totality. If inter-church relations are a theopolitical matter, then they cannot be understood on purely theological terms. they will be thus subject to some of the dynamics which apply to the general community making and border creation.
Could you that we can have some time for discussion of at least 5?
Wonderful, yes. So, I was going to give a couple of examples, one from Judaism, one from post-Tridentine Bavaria, how things that are irrelevant become relevant because they allow to draw the borders between communities. And I think this would help us to understand why the Greek Catholics, who make the borders between Catholics and Orthodox fluid and ambivalent, are often seen as troublemakers. To conclude, the question of how holistic and at the same time totally theological can be our understanding of ecumenical dialogue, I think is a big and important question. And I think that what needs to be done is somehow to put the place that dogma and intellectual propositions play in all this, in the totality of other issues. Not in the way of relativization, but maybe relativization as showing its place relative to other dimensions of relations between churches can be a huge help in our ecumenical dialogue. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this overview and also pointing out specific new approaches which are on the background of our reflections for ecumenical dialogue today. We have the time for 1 or 2 questions. Please, it's your turn.
I would like to have a question. I have a question.
Yeah, please. Father Dachko, please.
Yes. Paul, we know one another. I don't remember that Patriarch Sviatoslav Smytsnyuk had any meeting with Metropolitan Alfeyev. The last time he was in Lviv was in 2010, and this was when he was directing in a philharmonic orchestra, and he wanted to come to Ukraine in 2014, but since it was right after the annexation of Crimea, he was not permitted to enter Ukraine. I had meetings with him in Pavlo, in Vienna, and also in Chieti. But I do not remember any specific encounters between His Beatitude Sviatoslav and Archbishop of Metropolitan Ilarion Alfeyev. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Father Ivan. I've seen it quoted in one of the interviews by His Beatitude. I will find out it and can send it to you. I don't think that the meeting happened in Ukraine. It wasn't publicized. I haven't seen a photo, but it was mentioned in an interview.
Yes, please send me this. Send me this. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Father Galatza. Oh, go here if it cannot be heard.
Okay. Thank you very much for your paper. I have a question, but a comment on the previous question. I think there were perhaps 2 meetings unofficially, kind of as it happens in Rome, in the corridors or after dinner or something like that. But you can get the facts from the people involved. My question is about this new proposal for dialogue. Does it mean that we should anticipate union on the theological grounds through communion, as has been proposed by the Ukrainian Theological Society in the past, to find moments for intercommunion? Is this holistic vision, this liturgical vision of the church united around the altar part of your proposal, which I like it. I think it makes sense because it moves away just from text to the fullness of the experiential side of our Christian life. So can you say something about that?
Yes, thank you very much, Father Daniel. But your question shows that I didn't manage to deliver what my title has promised. Yes, I didn't propose to relativize theological issues. I just wanted to show that our attention to theological issues might be a bit asymmetrical to the place that theology should occupy. I think one of the signs of it, and one of the reasons why, for example, identity issues are important, comes from the dialogue between Orthodox and some non-Chalcedonian churches who have reached a theological agreement and no unity, no jurisdictional unity has followed. So it means that even if we solve all the issues, theological issues we have with the Orthodox, we might not get into unity. So not that theology is unimportant. I think it's very important, it's extremely important. I'm a theologian and not sociologist, which is like the biggest proof of my allegiance to theology, the written word and the propositions. But it's one of the elements which has been, I think, unduly over-exaggerated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Only a short question in order that we don't run out of time.
Thank you, Pavlo. Just following up on what was your answer. So you spoke about the, if I understood correctly, the theopolitical ecumenism. Can you briefly elaborate on that? Because I'm afraid that if we introduce politics in ecumenism, we would go back to the problematics of the unitism, political pressures causing unitism, on the one hand. On the other hand, if we introduce political or cultural or ideological agendas in our ecumenism, we would do what some churches are doing now, that is war against West, against certain principles, against certain values. So should be rather better to keep this, to separate theology and politics in our ecumenical endeavors. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a very interesting question. So I think two moments there. I don't think we should politicize ecumenical relations. I think that's a negative development. But I think we should be aware. We should see them, and we should also see that, for example, the Catholic openness to ecumenical dialogue, the Vatican II, is also due to the tragedy of the Second World War, to what modernity, globalization, etc., allowed us to do. So I don't say that we should be political, maybe on the contrary, but I say we should be aware of the political rationale. Huh?
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for your paper and the discussion. And we move now to the next speaker, who really doesn't deserve a real introduction. It's Reverend Dr. Peter Szabo, the President and Professor Ordinarius at the Postgraduate Institute of Canon Law at Insta Facultatis of the Pazmani Peter Catholic University in Budapest. You are most outstanding and well known, so I think in order to save time, I just really immediately gave you the word.
Thank you.
You will speak on ecclesiology of the Eastern Catholic Churches, developing insights into canon law and future ecumenical perspectives.
Yes, thank you. Dear colleagues, first and foremost, I would like to thank Roman Fichas and the organizing institution, the Catholic University of Lviv, and the PIO for the gracious invitation. I also congratulate you on the excellent program. The present conference will undoubtedly contribute to the better understanding of the Eastern ecclesiastical heritage, and through this to the growth of the appreciation of the Eastern tradition within